In this video, let's learn about the required root parameters. So far in our application, and also when we learn about HTTP, we had these endpoints, and the path is really just /employees, and they're all the same. Now, when it comes to the delete method and try to get a particular employee information, we had to use query string. So let me show you what we used before. We use /employees with a question mark and ID equals to 1. So this is to say, give me the employee information, and which employee exactly? It's the employee with ID equals to number 1. So this helps us target a particular employee. This path can be used in the get method or with delete method. But in this video, we're going to learn something new. Instead of using query string, we're going to use something like this. So /employees/1. So this is the same thing. This is the same purpose. We're going to target employee number 1. But why? Right? You may ask why we have to do this when we already has a mechanism, which is query string. Well, it has many benefits when we use it this way. This is cleaner, right? The URL is cleaner this way. So if you compare this with this, of course, /employees/1 is much cleaner than the query string, right? And also, it's better for search engine optimization because search engines, they actually look at the URL and then they consider a URL with a query string like this. Let me show you. They typically consider this URL and this URL are duplicate URLs. They see these are duplicate URLs, so they kind of ignore some of the URLs. So if you use /employees/1, this is going to be completely different from /employees/2. So if you have a requirement to actually use search engine to index all of these individual employees information, then you need to actually use this approach. And this is called a root template, right? So this is a template and it's called root template. So try to use root template instead of the query string. It's also because it's cleaner, so user has a better user experience. So because we have this approach, then this part of the URL becomes a variable. That's why we call it a parameter. And in ASP.NET Core, in order to make this part a variable, we typically use something like this, right? So instead of saying question mark ID equals to something, we're going to say curly brace ID. So this is a template. This particular one is the template. And /employees/1 or /2 or /20, these are the specific value that match that template, right? So this is the template. And when we use curly brace, the part that is inside the curly brace, it becomes a variable of this path, and we call that a root parameter. And specifically, this is a required root parameter, which means that if you put something like this, so let's use the delete method because the delete method already exists. I don't have to add an additional one. If you say like this, then this ID here, or this part of the URL is considered a required part. And let's make something clear. There's some terminology here. So first of all, this is called a root template. And the root template has different segments separated by slashes. A slash, and then this is the first segment, and this is the second segment. Okay, the segment that has curly braces are considered root parameters. And the segment that is hard-coded, like here, employees, these are hard-coded. This is called the literal segment. So again, this is the literal segment. And this is the root parameter and is a required root parameter. So if we have something like this, so let's say /employees/position and /ID. So this means that this part is the literal segment of the root template. And then we have two root parameters, two required root parameters. First one is the position. Second one is the ID. So these are the terminologies that we need to be clear. And then we're going to talk about how to match a template. So a endpoint will be defined with a root. And when a request comes in, the URL in the request has to match the root template. That's one of the conditions in order to be mapped to this. And how to map to the root template? The literal part of the segment. So the literal segment has to match 100%, except that it's case insensitive, right? So whether it's a lower e or uppercase e, whether it's a lowercase m or uppercase m, it doesn't really matter, but the letters has to be exactly the same. E, M, P, L, O, Y, E, E. So the literal segment has to match 100%. And then you have to provide two segments of variables here. So it doesn't really matter what you provide here. It's going to match to this first segment. We don't have a constraint on this parameter yet. So let's say 1 and then 2. So this URL is going to match this root template because it has 3 different segments. The first one exactly match the literal part. The second match the position. The third one match the ID. But if you have something like this, this is not going to match this particular root template. And if you have something like this, it's going to match to this particular root template. However, if you have something more like this, again, it is not going to match to this root template. Okay, so let's revert this. So when we say /abc/1, this is going to map to this root template, right? And then the endpoint with this root template will be selected if the method also matches. And once we have a match, the root parameter values will be stored in the context object. Let's take a look. So we're going to have an example like this. So we're going to have /employees/ID with just one root parameter. And then we're going to try to use /employees/1, try to match to this root template. Okay, so we're going to define this root template just like this in the map delete method here. And then we're going to set a breakpoint right here. And I'm going to run the application. All right, the application is running. We're going to the dummy 404 not found page. That's normal. But what we are going to do is we're going to go to this Postman over here. And then we're going to do let's say /101. And then I'm going to click on send. So the breakpoint is triggered over here. Now, if we look at the context object over here, and then we're going into the request. Now we're looking at the request object. And there is a root values variable here, or let's say call it property. And you can see that it says count equals 1. And if we open this, you can see ID equals 101. So what I'm trying to show you here is that once a template is matched, then the parameter value along with the parameter name is going to be recorded in the request object. So again, this is the root template. A HTTP request was just sent to the server through Postman. And it is a HTTP delete method, right? So therefore, it matches this root template. Why it matches the root template? Because I specified /employees/101. So this root template is matched. And also because third, the HTTP method also matched. Therefore, this endpoint handler is invoked. And also when there is a match, as I mentioned, the root values property in the HTTP context.request object records, or let's say stores the information about the parameter, the root parameter name and the root parameter value, so that our middleware is able to use that information. So let's change our code. Try to reflect that. So instead of deleting an employee, I'm going to say delete the employee. Okay, and then I'm going to use string interpolation to specify which employee is going to be deleted. And here, let's remove the breakpoint, and I'm going to say context.request.root values. And let me minimize this here. Okay, so I don't need to determine whether root values ID actually exist, because this is a required. If it doesn't have a match, it's going to go to the 404 not found, right? So if there's no match, this endpoint handler is not actually going to be triggered. So I don't actually need to try to check whether this parameter and its value actually exist in the root values property here. I know it exists. So I'm going to run it. And I'm going to go to Postman, try to execute it again. So this time, maybe let's change to 102 and then click on send. All right, we got a 200 OK status code. And then I got a HTTP response body that shows me delete the employee 102. So this is the correct HTTP response body that I am expecting. Okay, so let's try something else. Let's try to go over here, and then if I say, okay, I'm gonna remove this S, right? So let's try to see the literal segment to see that whether this can match, right? So if I click on send, so we got a 404 not found. So the literal segments has to match exactly. But the case doesn't really matter because we're using a lowercase e, but the template, okay, the template is also lowercase e. But if I try to use uppercase e here, I can still get a 200 OK response with the correct message over here, right? So the case is insensitive. But if I do something like this, right, and then click on send, you can see that we got a 404 not found, which means there's no match, okay? But if I add something here, add another required root parameter, and I'm gonna call it position. Now, if I run it with debug mode, let's run it, okay? And then go to here and click on send. Going back, pay attention here, we got two root parameter segments, and that is going to go into the context object. So quick watch, and then go to request, open it up, go to root values. You can see count equals to 2, and there's no surprise. We see position 102, ID ABC. Well, it's the reversed order, but that's because here first one is 102, second one is ABC, and that they're all mapped to this position correctly. So 102 mapped to position, ABC mapped to ID. All right, so in this video, you have learned the required root parameter concept, right? We have the root template concept, first of all, over here. And the root template has the literal part as well as a parameter part, variable part. And a required root parameter is specified with a curly brace and the name of the parameter inside it. And in order to map or match this root template, the literal part has to match exactly. And the parameter part doesn't really matter, but there has to be the same number of segments. We also talk about the differences between root parameter and query string. Root parameter is cleaner, it's better for SEO, search engine optimization, and it's user-friendly. So that's everything I want to cover in this video. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, I will see you in the next one.